There is an email that we now know about that Microsoft preferred we didn't see, and it details how the company may have rushed into its partnership with OpenAI. So, this email has come out because it's been recently unsealed thanks to the US Justice Department's antitrust suit against Google and the efforts of the New York Times, which requested that the email be unsealed after its existence was made public as part of that suit. Before we get to that email, just a little bit about what this lawsuit against Google is and why Microsoft's involved. So, this lawsuit is a major antitrust action being brought by the US Department of Justice against Google, and it alleges that they've engaged in anti competitive practices, namely through their dominance of search and search advertising. Now, there's a ton to the case, but basically, the government is trying to prove that Google's practices, like its deal with Apple to make Google the default search engine on Apple devices, have been these intentional moves to monopolize the search market. Google, however, says that its ownership of such a large share of the search market is due to the quality of its product, not anti-competitive actions. So as part of this lawsuit, Satya Nadella at Microsoft is taking the stand at times, and all these documents and exchanges are being analyzed and unsealed. So now to this email. In the email, which is from mid-2019, Microsoft CTO and Executive VP of AI, Kevin Scott, emails Satya Nadella saying he's, quote, very, very worried that he had made, quote, a mistake in underestimating Google's AI capabilities. He had at first thought they were just kind of doing an AI stunt, paying kind of lip service in public to AI. But he said that actually Google appeared to be building critical AI infrastructure and that this was already paying off, again, back in 2019, and it could take Microsoft, quote, multiple years to even attempt to compete with Google in AI. So according to reporting around this subject, Nadella took notice, immediately forwarded the email to his CFO, saying it explained, quote, why I want us to do this. And that appears to refer to the company's investment in OpenAI. Now, just weeks after this scenario happened, the company invested $1 billion in OpenAI, which was followed by billions and billions more that have been invested since then. This kind of starts to stand in a bit of contrast to the high-flying language that Microsoft has been using and has always used to kind of justify its investment in OpenAI. They talk a lot about, hey, this partnership accelerates AI breakthroughs and shares all their benefits with the world. But it turns out they may have just pulled the trigger on this partnership because they were actually really terrified of Google. So, Paul, kind of kicking this off here, I have to say, well into the past year, Google has been taking some serious heat for being behind in the AI race or not knowing what it's doing and not having its act together. And it just doesn't sound like that was totally the case. Microsoft appears to have been terrified. What does this email tell us about the conflict between Microsoft, Google, and the rest of the leading players?
Well, I mean, I think a belief that Google was behind in AI is a pretty uneducated opinion. They were never behind in AI research. They were behind in the productization of the AI. They certainly were caught off guard by OpenAI releasing ChatGPT, but Google's been doing AI research for 2 decades. They have greater infrastructure than anybody, more data than anybody, probably more AI researchers than anybody. I mean, thousands of AI researchers, 2 AI labs, world-leading AI labs. They weren't behind technically ever. They probably still aren't technically behind. Now, can they get out of their own way and get the right products to market? That's to be determined. But I don't think that they ever truly were behind. So I think it's helpful to have a little context here of who is Kevin Scott? It's not a name we've mentioned on the podcast maybe before. I mean, maybe once or twice we've dropped his name. But so Kevin spent 5 years at Google as a senior engineering manager from 2003 to 2007, and then again 2010 to 2011 for a 9-month stint. He then was the senior VP of engineering and operations at LinkedIn for 4 years from 2013 to 2017. Microsoft, if you'll recall, buys LinkedIn in June 2016. So Kevin is the Senior Vice President of Engineering and Operations at LinkedIn when the Microsoft acquisition happens. He then is moved into the chief technology officer role at Microsoft in January of 2017. So, what was happening in January 2017 in AI? Well, uh, DeepMind, which is the company I think he's referring to, of they were basically teaching AI to play games. That was Demis's strategy, still is. Like DeepMind, Google DeepMind, before they were acquired by Google in 2014, Demis believed video gameplay was the way to do reinforcement learning to train these models. So I think Kevin's saying, yeah, we thought they were just playing games, basically. Like we didn't know it was like going to be this massive thing. And so DeepMind won at the AlphaGo, which is a documentary we've talked about where they beat the world Go champion, Lee Sedol, in March 2016. So right around that time, DeepMind has this breakthrough in the game of Go. Smart replies, which you'll recall on your phone. So if you use Gmail and it would recommend replies to you, that was Google Smart Replies. That was 2017. 2017 is also the year the transformer was invented by the Google Brain team. So the Attention is All You Need paper came out in June of 2017, if I recall correctly. That led to Google Smart Compose in 2018. So again, now we're a year before this email happens. And so Google who has been working on language generation for 2 decades by this point, is now starting to make some significant progress in their ability to predict the next token or word in an email. So Google Smart Compose in 2018, the product release, so this combined a couple of language models that Google had already built. The product release said, email makes it easy to share information with just about anyone, friends, colleagues, and family, but drafting a message can take some time. Last year, we introduced Smart Reply in Gmail to help you quickly reply to incoming emails. Today, we're announcing Smart Compose, a new feature powered by AI to help you draft emails from scratch faster. The same day, Google Research put out a post that kind of gave the technical details of how Smart Compose was working. So they said we are constantly working on improving the suggestion quality of the language generation model by following state-of-art architectures. In parentheses, for example, transformer. So again, the transformer at this point is about a year old. The paper is about a year old, but it is not powering Smart Compose yet. Like they're playing with transformers. They're trying to figure out how to productize them. So they're starting to experiment with this stuff. And so we're kind of at this point where transformers are becoming a thing. Google invented them. Google has made progress on Smart Compose. They've been building their own chips. By that point, they had the TPUs, so they'd invented their own chips to help accelerate AI development. They have Google DeepMind and Google Brain. They have 2 major AI research labs. So they're doing a lot. But it appears at that point that Kevin and Microsoft maybe are underappreciating all of the progress they're making. So now let's come back to the email, which is, I mean, it's fascinating. Like we'll put the link in the show notes. You can go read it for yourself. But I would say 90% of the email is redacted. So it's not like we have the whole email. Like Microsoft was able to argue to the judge not to release it for competitive reasons, most of it. But what we do have is quite fascinating. So I'll just read the couple of paragraphs that we actually have from this email. So again, this is from Kevin Scott to Satya Nadella, the CEO, and Bill Gates, who I think Bill's the chairman of Microsoft still, June 12th, 2019. So now again, we have the context of what else was going on at this time. And it is thoughts on OpenAI. So after the redactions, the thing that's interesting about what OpenAI and DeepMind and Google Brain are doing is the scale of their ambition and how that ambition is driving everything from data center design to compute silicon to networks and distributed systems architecture to numerical optimizers, compilers, programming frameworks, and high-level abstractions that model developers have at their disposal. When all these programs were doing was competing with one another to see which reinforcement learning system could achieve the most impressive game playing stunt. Again, this perception that they were just like playing around with games. I was highly dismissive of their efforts. So this is Kevin speaking. That was a mistake. When they look at all the infrastructure they had built to build natural language processing models that we couldn't easily replicate, I started to take things more seriously. And as I dug in to try to understand where all the capability gaps were between Google and us for model training, I got very, very worried. Turns out, just replicating BERT, which was one of the early language models within Google, wasn't easy for us to do. Even though we had the template for the model, it took us approximately 6 months to get the model trained before our infrastructure wasn't up to the task. Google had BERT for at least 6 months prior to that. So, in the time that it took us to hack together the capability to train a 300 million parameter model, 340 million parameter model, they had a year to figure out how to get it into production and move to a larger scale, more interesting models. We are already seeing the results of that work in our competitive analysis of their products. One of the Q&A competitive metrics that we watched just jumped by 10 percentage points on Google search because of BERT-like models. Their autocomplete in Gmail, which is especially useful in the mobile app, is getting scarily good. And then we have one other paragraph of this 3-page email that isn't redacted. And it says, we have very smart machine learning people in Bing, in the vision team, and in the speech team. So again, they had all these, they had thousands of AI researchers themselves. So he's saying they're good, but the core deep learning teams within each of these bigger teams are very small, and their ambitions have also been constrained, which means that even as we start to feed them resources, they still have to go through a learning process to scale up. And we are multiple years behind the competition in terms of machine learning scale. So, I mean, again, like there's so many fascinating details here. So back in like 2018, 2019, one of the ways I would assess like how far along organizations were, how far along SaaS companies were, cloud companies were, brands were, is I would go to LinkedIn Sales Navigator and looked at how many machine learning engineers they had. There were some major AI software companies, business and marketing AI software companies that had less than 20. And so my feeling was they don't understand what's about to happen. They're not taking this seriously enough. When you looked at Microsoft and Google and Amazon and IBM, they had thousands. So you knew they were doing stuff. But what they were doing was, as Kevin highlights, they were doing these very, very narrow, specific things using machine learning to make predictions about outcomes and behaviors. They didn't have this grand vision for what happens when AI can think and reason and understand and generate. That's what OpenAI had. So OpenAI fell into this space where all of a sudden they realized the potential of the transformer architecture that Google invented, and they built GPT-1. Then you had some other companies start to apply this to like image generation and eventually video generation. All the while, Microsoft wasn't there. So why did they invest in OpenAI? Maybe it is because they realized it was going to take them way longer than they wanted to catch up. That's what Kevin's saying. Basically, is like, even if we throw $1 billion at this, we go hire 1,000 researchers, we are not set up to do this. Like, we haven't had this vision, this ambition before this. And I think that's the thing I took away from it. And again, like, I'm not going to name names, but like, I have talked to some major software companies, and a lack of vision and ambition was pretty common play around that time. So even after ChatGPT, you'll have these conversations and you realize like they just missed it. Like they just didn't see what was coming. It's not that they didn't have talented people and they weren't executing really well on their roadmap, but they hadn't seen around the corner yet. And so it seems like that's basically what Kevin is admitting is like, we were doing this stuff for 20 years and we didn't see it. And we didn't realize what Google was building over there. So yeah, I mean, it's fascinating, man. Like I feel bad for Microsoft it's out there, but at least they got the rest of this thing redacted. I would love to read the rest of it. That's for sure.
Yeah, that's just an incredible look at kind of the inside baseball that's really driving these decisions.